President Lula Da Silva is set to meet with his Ukrainian counterpart for the first time after months of diplomatic and forth between the two leaders. Mayk Dennis Oliveira will tell us more about this live. Mike?
Good evening, Fred. The President Luis Inacio Lula da Silva will meet with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in New York on Wednesday, while they are attending the UN General Assembly as announced by the Brazilian presidency.
Lula, who had advocated the creation of a group of countries to mediate an end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, will hold its first in-person bilateral meeting with Zelenskyy while in New York. To recall, both leaders had a video conversation last March, but they had a starkly different public summaries regarding what they discussed. Zelenskyy underscored the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but Lula did not emphasize such matter in his discussion on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Both leaders also failed to meet during the G7 summit in Japan. Lula expressed disappointment at that time and said that Zelenskyy was late. The Ukrainian president, on the other hand, played down the fact that he did not meet his Brazilian counterpart. Lula has tried to play the role of a peacemaker in the Russia-Ukraine conflict since taking office on January 1. While acknowledging that Ukraine has the right to defend itself, Lula has refused to join sanctions against Russia or send military aid to Ukraine. He instead sought to mediate a diplomatic solution, although he criticized Western support for Ukraine as a way of prolonging the conflict.
It is highly expected, Fred, that the Russia-Ukraine conflict will be discussed in the UN General Assembly, although some other countries are also expected to pitch their concerns regarding poverty, inequality, the increasing food prices, and the worsening climate emergency. Back to you, Fred.
Thank you, Mikey, for that live report. Former U.S. President Donald Trump will skip the Second Republic debate. Instead, he will address auto workers in Detroit amid an ongoing labor dispute on September 27. He plans to criticize President Biden's electric vehicle policies and court support from blue-collar union members amid an ongoing labor dispute in the auto industry. This move indicates Trump's focus on the general election, aiming to win back working-class voters who supported Biden in 2020. The strike by the United Auto Workers Union poses a political challenge for Biden, and Trump seeks to position himself as a champion of auto workers in key swing states for the 2024 election.
Russian President Putin declared that the country has effectively endured and rebounded from the extensive sanctions pressure, marking a successful recovery from unprecedented economic constraints. Angie De Leon tells us more.
President Vladimir Putin recently declared that Russia's economy has successfully bounced back, reaching the same gross domestic product or GDP level as before the Ukraine-related sanctions were imposed. Speaking at a government meeting discussing the draft federal budget for 2024 to 2026, Putin emphasized that Russia had overcome tough challenges. Putin said, quote, "In simple terms, Russia's economy is back to where it was before sanctions hit us. We've managed to withstand the pressure from sanctions and challenges from the West." End of quote. He also revealed that Russia's GDP has returned to its 2021 level. Putin stressed how important it is to maintain stable growth. When talking about economic growth, Putin mentioned that while experts initially predicted a 1.2% growth in GDP for April, Russia has already exceeded that target. He even projected that by the end of the year, Russia's GDP growth might reach 2.5% or possibly 2.8%. Putin also stressed the concern of rising prices or inflation. He explained that one of the main reasons for this was the weakening of the Russian ruble. He then urged his country's financial authorities to figure out why the ruble was weakening and to take action quickly to address it. Finally, Putin mentioned that the government had prepared a draft state budget for the next 3 years. Although there were still some disagreements on certain aspects, he called on the government to finalize the budget as soon as possible. Reporting, this has been Angie De Leon, SMNI News.
Top diplomats of Russia and China met in Moscow amid talks that Russian President Vladimir Putin will travel to Beijing to meet with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. Kai Vilan reports.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that as major countries in the world and also as permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and Russia bear important responsibilities for maintaining global strategic stability and promoting world development and progress. Wang, also a member of the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China Central Committee, made a statement in a meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow. The Chinese top diplomat said both China and Russia uphold an independent foreign policy, and their cooperation is not targeted at any third party, nor will it be influenced or manipulated by any third party. In the face of rising unilateralism, hegemonism, and black confrontation, Wang said China and Russia should conform to the trend of the times, shoulder responsibility as major countries, fulfill their due international obligations, strengthen strategic cooperation, and adhere to true multilateralism. He said that both sides need to promote multipolarity in the world and advance the development of global governance equally. Meanwhile, Lavrov shared his view on the situation in Ukraine and highly commented on China's position paper for taking into account the security concerns of all parties, which he said is conducive to addressing the root causes of the conflict. Russia will also continue to be open to negotiations and dialogues. The two sides also exchanged views on other international and regional issues of common concern. The meeting comes following the talks between Wang Yi and U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in Malta regarding U.S. and China, the Asia-Pacific region, and other issues. The sad talks also come as Putin is set to travel to China in October at the invitation of Xi. Reporting for Newsline World, Kai Vilan, SMNI News.
For the first time in history, the United States has exceeded its national debt amounting to $33 trillion. Jane Domingo has the details.
The U.S. gross national debt exceeded $33 trillion for the first time on Monday. And this milestone was noted in a daily report of the country's Treasury Department, which detailed the balance sheet of the U.S. It came as the Congress appeared to be faltering in its efforts to fund the American government ahead of the deadline on September 30. The Bank of America said that there's a 50% chance that the U.S. government will face a shutdown if Congress fails to reach a solution by the end of September. To recall, on January 19, the U.S. hit its $31.4 trillion debt ceiling. In June, a debt ceiling bill suspended the effect of the U.S. federal government debt ceiling until 2025, and then the size of the federal government debt quickly exceeded to $32 trillion. To recall, Fitch, one of the three major independent agencies that assess creditworthiness, downgraded the U.S. long-term foreign currency issuer default rating to AA+ from AAA over concerns about the high and growing debt burden of the U.S. government. It also expected that U.S.'s rating will continue to deteriorate over the next 3 years. Reporting, this has been Jean Domingo, SMNI News.